Good day, everyone. Welcome to the 11th lecture for module number 1 of the course IE 306 Supply Chain and Logistics Management. In this particular lecture, we will talk about the impellers of supply chain, which are nothing but factors which are to the development of supply chain management concepts. And we'll also talk about 3 interrelated concepts in supply chain. So these are the topics for discussion in this particular lecture. Without further delay, let's get started. So the term impeller means a force or a factor that molds or reshapes the way in which businesses are being carried out in the hyper competitive market environment. So by the term impeller, I mean factors or forces which have led to the development of modern supply chain management concepts. So there are three major impellers of supply chain. The very first impeller is termed as empowered customer. So in the past, especially in developing countries, customers had very few choices in terms of the variety of products, the price range in which they could buy products, and they were forced to accept whatever quality manufacturers supply. So since the market as such was basically monopolistic in nature, there were rather less number of competitors. The customers were forced to buy from whatever the manufacturer had to offer them in terms of price, in terms of variety, and in terms of quality. So in the past, the manufacturer was king. But the present day customers, due to the change in the market conditions, they have access to abundant amount of information regarding the products, their availability, variety, quality, price, etc. And high levels of competition in the market today also has empowered customers with a wider variety of choices in terms of product features, product price, in terms of quality requirements. So these changes in terms of access to information regarding products and access to a wider variety of choices have changed the scenario where customers are put in the driver's seat, where they demand value and service from manufacturers. So the condition has changed from manufacturer was king in the past to customer is king in the current situation. So to contend with this change in power from the manufacturer to the customer, industry leaders have resorted to using the best practices in supply chain, okay, and also had to develop new methods and concepts of supply chain to become more responsive as well as cost efficient. So the first factor that drove changes or developments in the concept of supply chain is the empowered nature of customers with wider or greater access to information regarding products and wider or better choices in terms of variety of products due to the higher levels of competition that exists in the market today. The second impeller or the second force that drives the development of supply chain management is the development of information technology tools. So IT tool development have resulted or has resulted in the development and expansion of the use and practice of concepts of supply chain management. The concept of supply chain management requires integration of data across different stages of supply chain. So you have to collect data, you have to analyze data across supply chain, and this practice of collecting and analyzing data across the supply chain or information across the supply chain is a very difficult task unless we have the right tools for this data collection and analysis. So development of IT tools, okay, has resulted in the development as well as the expansion of the practice or use of supply chain concepts, supply chain management concepts. Moreover, these IT tools also grant greater end-to-end visibility and control of the material and fund flow across the entire supply chain. Okay, so the development has resulted in better visibility of what is happening at the different stages. Okay, right from the supplier end to the customer end. So the end-to-end visibility has been improved across supply chain due to the IT tools. They can constantly monitor what is happening in terms of the material as well as fund flow across the different stages of the entire supply chain with better IT development or IT tools. Okay, and it also helps in better coordination of both intra and inter company operations. So operations within the company and between different companies which are part of the supply chain, that is also coordinated in a much better fashion by the use of these IT tools. Okay, so these all basically result in better supply chain optimization. So some of the common ITE tools, which are information technology enabled tools, they are MRP, MRP1, which is material requirement planning, and manufacturing resource planning, okay, respectively. We have ERP softwares or ERP tools, which is enterprise resource planning tools. We have CPFR tools, which are collaborative planning, forecasting and replenishment tools, and we have other tools like vendor managed inventory tools. So some of the ITE tools which have resulted in development of supply chain management, okay, or concepts of supply chain management. Then also development in IT has resulted in better capture of point of sales data. Okay, the live and real time capture and availability of data at the point of sale, okay, has enabled the supply chain to better develop its replenishment systems. Okay, so better replenishment concepts or better inventory concepts and replenishment systems were developed due to the use of point of sales data capture and its real-time availability across the entire supply chain. And one of the third developments in IT tools is with regard to performance measurement tools, specifically supply chain level performance measurement tools. So this also has resulted in better managerial controls as well as establishment of a continuous appraisal or review system for system level performance. So these IT tools or developments in IT and IT tools have led to the widespread, more widespread use of supply chain tools in supply chain, concept of supply chain management. The final impeller of supply chain management is basically, or supply chain is basically globalization. So with globalization, the business environment has developed and we come across a globalized business environment where markets, manufacturing facilities and sources for various raw materials and parts required by firms are spread across the entire globe. So this particular uh, varied geographical location of markets, manufacturing facilities and sources has basically brought about a new problem in terms of coordination of these different supply chain functions and stages which are spread across the different parts of the globe. So to address these issues with regard to the geographical, which are brought about by varied geographical locations of markets, manufacturing facilities and sources, okay, it was required to address these issues, and to address these issues it was required for the manufacturers of firms, rather supply chain firms, to develop better tools and trade practices that minimized time delay and ensured better coordination across different stages. At the same time, there were issues or barriers which were connected to international trade. So supply chain management or management firms basically had to come up with new supply chain strategies and best practices so that these barriers which are connected with international trade could also be covered. Okay, so an example of how globalization basically acts as an impeller is given over here, where to minimize the cost of manufacturing, a particular firm may outsource its manufacturing to a country, okay, a developing country specifically, where the labor costs are low. So you can outsource this particular manufacturing to another firm, or they can set up their own plant in a developing country where the labor costs are low. But this particular advantage that is gained by lowering the manufacturing cost by locating the manufacturing facility in an entirely different country will be completely negated or lost if the logistics infrastructure in that particular country is poor. Poorer logistics infrastructure will result in higher transportation costs, and that will completely, in most cases, if it is very poor, it will completely eat away the benefits that you gain by the lowering of manufacturing costs. So thus this will force the supply chain or firms involved in delivering products or services to customers to think of new strategies and new best practices. That is why globalization is also considered to be one of the impellers of supply chain. So the three impellers of supply chain are empowered customers, development of IT tools, and globalization. So next we'll move on to another topic, that is different supply chain concepts. So we'll come across three different concepts which are core to the philosophy of supply chain management. And these three concepts are basically interrelated concepts. So we'll start off with the very first concept for supply chain. It's called a system concept. And this concept emphasizes the interdependence between functions within an organization and also between organizations that are involved in delivering products or services to the customers. So no two firms or no two functions in an organization or no two organizations involved in a supply chain can work independently. They can work independently, but if they work independently, it will result in unintended losses as well as wastages. So that is why the interdependence between different functions within an organization and also between different organizations that are involved in delivering the products or services which are part of the supply chain as a whole, their interdependence is vital. So interfunctional or intercompany interdependence, if it is neglected, it will result in unintended losses as well as wastages. That is, if a particular company focuses on cost reduction at an individual function or a company level across an entire supply chain, okay, if one of the stages basically focuses only upon its optimization, okay, or cost reduction of that particular stage, then this particular cost reduction may result or may affect the performance of another function, thereby resulting in a sub-optimized performance in delivering services to the customers. So the focus should not be on cost reduction at an individual stage, but rather across the entire supply chain. So we have to, in this, the systems concept emphasizes the interdependence between the functions within an organization and also between organizations that are part of the supply chain. Okay, that is why we take the entire supply chain as a system. What is important, what should be given prime importance is a system, supply chain system, not the stages and functions. This is the first of the three interrelated concepts. So to give you an example of the systems concept, okay, we have taken an example, okay, where in the first example we have the production function of a particular firm, okay, trying to optimize or trying to reduce their entire cost by producing at large scale. So production done at a large scale by a particular production facility of a company to keep the setup cost low. So every time, if you manufacture in smaller quantities, every time you have to manufacture, you have to set up the entire plant to manufacture the particular product. So the setup costs will keep on adding up. So in order to avoid that, once they have set up a particular plant to produce a particular product, they usually produce at very large volumes. So this is basically what is called as function level optimization of cost. So the cost is kept as low as possible at a function level. So they are prioritizing function level cost minimization. So this will result in large amounts of inventory being held up because you're producing in large quantities. Okay, the demand doesn't vary. Okay, producing in large quantities doesn't generally result in higher levels of demand. It may help you to price the product at a lower rate, which might influence demand, but as a whole, producing at large scale only reduces the manufacturing cost. But this will also correspondingly result in the company having to hold very large amounts of inventory. So the inventory holding cost will go up. So the advantage that you gain by optimizing production and keeping its production cost low might be completely taken away or eaten up by the increased holding cost due to larger amounts of inventory. So the across the entire supply chain, when you take it, it might result in the lowering of supply chain profitability. Okay. Another example is a case where a transportation company who is given charge of transporting goods from the manufacturing facility to the customers or the retailer. Okay, they wait for loads to be consolidated from the manufacturer. So they want their trucks to be filled completely before they transport the goods. So if a company or a manufacturer basically manufactures in batches, okay, the company after its first batch manufacture, they use that particular manufactured batch and load it onto the truck. They see that the truck is not completely full. So what the transporter does is he waits for another batch to come out, okay, so that they can fill the entire truck and keep the transportation cost low. So they are trying to use the vehicle capacity to the maximum. So the transportation company that is in charge of the transportation of the goods from the manufacturer to the retailer or to the customer, they are trying to optimize their function, their cost at the function level. But this will result in delayed replenishment of stock at the retailer or delayed delivery of products to the customers. Okay. So if it is basically delivered to the retailer, a result in delayed replenishment of stock might result in lost sale and revenue. Okay, if the replenishment was done on time, where after a particular batch the batch was completely shipped to the retailers, if there was no delay, the customers would have had products to buy. Okay, and when the customers come to the store and find there is no product, it's basically a lost opportunity of sale, and that particular lost sale and revenue, okay, that might be even greater than the amount that is saved, okay, in transporting items together, okay, in larger quantities. There is an example of where we see optimization or trying to reduce the cost at a single stage will affect the performance of an entire supply chain. Okay, so the entire supply chain as a whole will be performing at a suboptimal level due to the focus upon just one of the functions or one of the stages. So that's why in systems concept it emphasizes the interdependence between functions and between organizations. Okay, so the key here is collective performance of the entire supply chain, not functional or link level performance. So it is also important that a firm identifies as well as removes both intra and intercompany wastages. By intra I mean within the company, and intercompany means between companies. So the wastages both within and between companies and non-value adding activities, they have to be identified and removed. The second interrelated supply chain concept is called as cost concept. So this concept emphasizes the need for intra and intercompany coordination, cooperation and collaboration in all the activities. Okay, starting from design and development to manufacturing and distribution, so as to optimize the total cost and maximize value that is delivered to the customer. Okay, so the total cost concept emphasizes that all the functions within an organization and all organizations involved in the supply chain, they have to coordinate all coordinate, cooperate and collaborate in all activities, okay, from design and development to manufacturing and distribution, so that the total cost across the entire supply chain is optimized. That means it is kept minimum. Okay, the total supply chain cost is kept minimum so that we can maximize value to the customer. And by the term value, I mean a value to a customer is nothing but the ratio between benefits to cost. Okay, so one of the better way of improving value, you can have different ways of improving value. One is by increasing benefits at the same cost. The second way is by uh, providing the same benefits at a lower cost, and the third one is by improving benefits, okay, and by reducing cost together. So the best way of doing this is by not adding to any benefits but by reducing the cost. So if we can reduce the total cost involved in supply chain and deliver this particular product at the lowest possible cost to the customer, then you are delivering maximum value to the customer. So value is nothing but the ratio of benefits or use of that particular product or service to the customer divided by the cost that or the amount that the customer is spending on acquiring that particular product or service. Okay, so value can be improved by reducing the cost. That's why total cost concept emphasizes the need for both functions within an organization and different organizations in the supply chain to coordinate, cooperate and collaborate in all activities so that they can keep the total cost at the optimal level, which is at the lowest possible level. So value delivered to a customer, as I told you, can be maximized only if the total cost across the entire supply chain, that means across all the links, is minimized. So any reduction at the functional, okay, at a particular single stage of a supply chain or any link level cost reduction is of little value to a customer unless it results in the overall reduced cost to customer. Okay, so the overall cost to customer is reduced by reducing the cost of another function level cost, then that is beneficial for the customer. But if you try and reduce the cost of one of the stages and we see that this particular reduction in cost of one of the stages has resulted in another function or another stage not performing optimally where the cost increases, then it might result in an overall cost to customer increasing rather than decreasing. So what is important is the total cost across supply chain has to be minimized, okay, not functional or link level cost reduction. This is what the total cost concept emphasizes. And the last concept in supply chain, the last of the three integrated concept, is a trade-off concept. And this concept emphasizes the need for decision makers, okay, or the people involved at the management level of organizations or firms which are part of the supply chain to explore alternatives or combination of alternatives to meet customer requirements while minimizing overall cost. Okay, so to meet the needs of the customer, there might not only be just one alternative, there might be different alternatives, or there might be a different combination of alternatives which can work. But different combinations or different alternatives will have different levels of overall supply chain cost. So we should, the decision makers involved in the supply chain, they should try and explore all the possible alternatives and combination of alternatives which will meet the customer requirements at the same time minimizing the overall cost. Okay, so here, in order to achieve this particular customer requirement meeting, okay, sorry, to meet the customer requirement at the same time reduce overall cost, certain functions might have to trade off or give up certain level optimization. Okay, say for example, take the case where a faster transportation through a more expensive mode may be acceptable if it helps lower the inventory level and increase responsiveness for a time sensitive customer. So if your customer is a person who gives importance to responsiveness or priority to uh, time of delivery, then what is more important for you is to basically make the product available to the customer at the lowest possible time. Okay, and in doing so, that is by delivering the in making the product available to the customer at the lowest possible time, we should also ensure that the cost is as minimum as possible. Okay, so in this particular case, using a faster mode of transportation, okay, which might be more expensive than using a slower mode of transportation, might be acceptable if the faster mode of transportation allows the entire company to only maintain lower amounts of inventory, thus lowering the inventory cost. So the increase in transportation cost by using a faster mode of transportation, okay, that might be less than the amount of savings that you get, okay, in terms of lowered inventory costs when you use this particular faster mode of transportation. So this particular combination, okay, will give you the required level of responsiveness for your customer, so meeting a customer requirement, but at the same time it will keep that particular cost to a lower level. So if the same time sensitive customer was served, uh, the required level of responsiveness for the customer was maintained by using a slower mode of transportation and keeping larger amounts of inventory. Okay, a completely opposite approach where you are using a slower mode of transportation which is less expensive, okay, but you are producing or you are giving the required level of responsiveness by maintaining a larger amount of inventory, then the total cost in that particular option might be greater than the one that is used here. Okay, so that means we have to trade off between different functions and different stages, okay, so that we can achieve the customer requirement or meet the customer requirement while minimizing the overall cost. So these are the three interrelated supply chain concepts. Okay, so with this I conclude this lecture. Thank you.